This is Indian History Thali by Thali, where we ask archaeologists and historians how they know what they know about India's past. In this series, we will focus on Indian history through the lens of food. In this episode, we're going to explore what people were eating in medieval times. We will travel from the Khilji court of Malwa with its capital at Mandu to the Mughal capital of Delhi, and thereafter make our way to the western coast, traveling from Gujarat to Kerala and back again. Our sources from this period include court chronicles, cookbooks, traveler accounts, paintings, and local tales. So, what do these sources tell us about what people were eating at this time?
In his Rihla, Ibn Battuta tells us of many interesting things that he ate when he was journeying from Multan to Delhi. One of which was, of course, the samosak or the samosa, which was introduced during the Delhi Sultanate. And he tells us that it was a very fascinating snack. Every person would get 4 to 5 of these, and there would be this thin bread in which you would, stuff the mince, chopped onions. There'd be walnuts, almond, pistachios. So this very rich concoction, which would be served to, and this was like a multi-course meal. It wasn't even like a 4-course meal. There was like 10, 15 courses. One of which was, of course, samosa. And then when you move on to closer to the 14th, 15th century, you have another fascinating gastronomical treatise called the Ni'mat-Nama of the Mandu Sultans in Malwa. And that again has around 10 different recipes of the samosa, not just those filled with minced meat, but of course also this very interesting samosa that they would make of thickened milk. But also very exotic meats. So for example, Parbati samosas, which was mountain goat.
And what about the south?
In Mānasollāsa, in the section on Annabhoga, the descriptions on food are highly informative of the kind of food that a king and his courtiers and people in the court consumed in the period between mainly early 12th century. And we have elaborate discussions of not only the main courses that they had from rice and butter, but also even smaller things like stimulants or drinks, water, the different kinds of water they drank. And interestingly, we have almost 2 centuries later from the same region, Ibn Battuta, who also passed through Karnataka in mid 14th century, in 1340s. He also gives a similar descriptions of the kind of buffet, kind of big dinner that he had with a Sultan of Honnavar, which is a coastal town close to Mangalore today. And what is interesting is that we have similar descriptions in Annabhoga being practiced or being repeated in mid 14th century as a practice.
A lot of these treatises, say for example the Ni'mat-Nama and even before the Mānasollāsa, they will deliberately introduce meats which are very exotic to show that the king was rich enough to have these meats, recipes which were very complex and very layered and would have multiple ingredients because through food the king is trying to show his status and his wealth. So I think the gastronomical treatises were also this exaggerated version of what the king ate.
The lives of Mughal emperors reveal a complex relationship with food and ritual. Akbar, for instance, banned the slaughter of cows and observed days of vegetarian practice, shaped by his long engagements with Hindus, Jains, and Sufis. So, what did the emperor eat on these occasions? And are there similar tales of fasting and food from the coast?
So, Akbar would have days of abstinence, which he called Sufiyana days, where he would not eat meat. So, he would then be served a host of dishes. Abul Fazl divides dishes into 3. One is, of course, on common days, one is, of course, on abstinence days, and one is, of course, when the emperor is not well or something. And abstinence days were interesting because either he was served khichdi, even though khichdi was also made with meat, these were all non-meat khichdis, vegetarian khichdis, with of course a lot of dry fruits and saffron and all the other things to make it rich enough for the king.
So I would like to add to this, particularly on eating meat. There is a very interesting passage in the Chinese traveler Ma Huan's account of Calicut in early 15th century. and he says that the local ruler, is a Nair, belongs to the Nair community, Nair caste, but his overseer or Shahbandar or the portmaster, he says that he belongs to a Muslim community, which is part of a larger cosmopolitan culture that existed in the region. But a few decades ago they came into a compact that the Muslims do not slaughter cows and the Hindu ruler do not eat pork, which he says that is continued to be practiced. So the communal feasting across caste boundaries is considered as a pollution or something that pollute the caste identity, which would eventually force people in order to be expelled from their caste, and these people would be enslaved, sold into slavery. And this is a complaint not only in the medieval period, well into the 19th century we have the complaints of people, how people were enslaved. They were invited into a dinner or lunch by some of the merchants, including Muslim and Christian merchants, and eventually cheated or betrayed through a communal feasting that would eventually pollute them and forcing them into slave market.
Court records focus almost entirely on the food culture of the royals and elite, leaving little room for detailed discussions of what ordinary people actually ate. How can the historian piece together these missing stories?
Again, the kind of sources are fragmentary for any other, similar to any other ordinary people's lives in this period, in the medieval period, compared to the royals. But still we have some, at least from southern and coastal India, sources by or travel accounts by many foreign travelers who had come to the region, but also some smaller local sources such as Grandhavaris in different languages, either in Sanskrit, Malayalam or Tamil, which also give instances. In 13th century, one Chinese author in his account, Chufanshi, talks about clarified butter with rice being consumed in many of the places.
In northern India, people ate everyday staples like wheat, rice and barley alongside hearty millet flour soups. Traveler accounts highlight 4 or 5 intoxicants, including relatively recent additions like tobacco.
So of course we've had arak for a very long time, even the Mānasollāsa talks about it. But what we now had, thanks to this introduction of this Italian Arab device, distillation device called the Moor's Head, where the condenser was part of the distillation still. So it would give more efficient condensation. And therefore it was able, people were able to double distill the liquor, called do atisha in Farsi, double distillation, which was a very potent liquor. So of course we had kings like Jahangir consuming like 20 cups a day of something like this. So he would say 14 in the day and 6 in the night. But then also general people would, consume intoxicants like this. Also the fact that at this point of time we have tobacco. Around the 17th century is when tobacco was introduced, and it takes on very quickly. It was introduced by the Portuguese, of course, but it takes on very quickly, so much so that by 1617 Jahangir has to issue a ban on the consumption of tobacco because he's worried that it is changing people's temperaments, etc. We have tobacco's crops being grown by 1604, 1605. By 1622 we are already sending it to the world. So that's how quickly tobacco spread. In the Coromandel coast, if I could just add to what Professor Kooria said, the pan, which is the betel nut, and the tobacco combination had already happened, and it was being served in Hindu weddings. So you would have tobacco put inside the betel nut along with the supari, which is the rika nut, and served to it's served during the Hindu weddings. And of course pan is something, another very interesting thing that Ibn Battuta talks about. He says that pan is so important that if you go to somebody's house, a friend's house, and if he gives you 5 betel leaves, then that means he's given you, his entire wealth or something like that. That's how important it was. It was considered as a very valued gift.
How did trade influence food?
We have accounts of the kind of food that Jewish merchants from Yemen, Egypt, as well as Tunisia, who were living in places like Mangalore or Nehravala in Gujarat, were importing. And some of them, even though many of the dry fruits or many ingredients were available locally, they would still, instead of using the local ones, they would import similar ones from Yemen or Egypt. And it's interesting that especially raisins, being one major ingredient that they would import. And Elizabeth Lambourne, who has worked on the social lives of Jewish merchants in the region, says that raisins were a very important gift that Jewish merchants would give to each other as well as to other people that they meet. That means whatever we see, or in many places we have this assumption that many commodities are very locally produced, and these are part of the unique local food culture, which is not true. Whatever we see in the places like in Kerala, something like the steam cake, puttu, or in dosha in Tamil Nadu region, they are part of a larger Indian Ocean food culture, you could say. And often people think that these food items went from Indian subcontinent to the other places, but it is difficult to prove that way. It can also equally be from these places these items came to the Indian subcontinent.
Manuscripts like the Nimatnama and the Mānasollāsa tell us what the rich ate. Ordinary lives are more difficult to piece together. Traveler accounts help us complete the puzzle. While elites were importing camphor from Sumatra to flavor their pan, ordinary people were adding oil to their rice instead of ghee. Lavish feasts formed the mainstay of courtly culture, and fasting became an integral part of private lives. And that's how we uncover Mandu's royal banquets alongside the modest daily fare of the western coast.